My stepson put lavender in my shower products and laughed when I broke out in rashes. And his father said I was making a big deal over nothing. When I tried to stand up for myself, he scoffed and said, "Don't act like you're some victim." I just looked at him. That was 2 months ago. Last night, he called me 34 times crying. When I married my husband, I was convinced I'd be a great stepmother to his 17-year-old son Jared. But then I met Jared, and the first words he ever said to me was that I was a washed-up homewrecker. This set the tone for our relationship. I wouldn't have even minded not being super close with him as long as he was cordial towards me. But he wasn't. Instead, he was verbally and even physically abusive. I've been called names by him, even racial names. He orders me around the house whenever he wants something, and fully expects me to run and get it like I'm his assistant. Just a few weeks ago, he said he wanted me to drive to a burger place and bring him back a meal, then clapped his hands at me like I was his butler. My husband thought it was the funniest thing on earth, even tossing me my keys. That's another huge problem I have. My husband enabling Jared no matter what. The racial names I get called are just jokes. Him ordering me around is him being a teenager. And when Jared flicks my temple or a slap on my behind, he's just being playful. This level of abuse and enabling has become too much, and I'm going to file for divorce. But not before I finish getting back at Jared. You see, there's one particular incident that caused everything. A few weeks ago, we were eating dinner when Jared started talking about being suspended from school for BS reasons. His dad asked him what these BS reasons were, and Jared said bullying a poorer kid. My jaw dropped. I asked if he actually bullied him, and Jared said, "Hell no, I don't even punch him or anything, I just make jokes about his clothes or whatever. It's not my fault he's broken sensitive." My eyes went wide, but right as I was about to say something, his dad interjected. "Really? They're giving out to you over some jokes you made at some ugly poor kid. School is too soft nowadays, you gotta harden kids up." I was gobsmacked. I wanted to stay silent, but I couldn't. So I spoke up and said, "Funny of you to say you need to harden kids up when Jared is the most spoiled kid I've ever met." I was immediately shot daggers by my husband, and Jared yelled at me, "What the F did you just say?" We got into a heated argument which ended with my stepson flipping his chair and leaving the table. My husband proceeded to blame me for Jared's reaction. That was my nail in the coffin. I started researching divorce lawyers. But then something happened, and although it made me more sure of divorce than ever, it also made me want to stay around just a little bit longer, because what I did to Jared without him even knowing was so funny, it was worth enduring the abuse. To understand what I mean, you need to understand, I am allergic to lavender. My skin breaks out if it makes contact with it. I get painful rashes that last weeks. I went to shower the day after our argument, and at first all was good, but then my body became very itchy. I kept getting more and more sore, until I was forced to get out of the shower, dry myself off and check what was wrong, and almost instantly after getting out, my skin started breaking out into hives and rashes. I knew what they were immediately as I know what lavender does to my body, but I couldn't for the life of me figure out why there was lavender in my body wash. I checked the bottle and it was clear. I did research on the product and found no lavender anywhere. I was walking to my room extremely puzzled when I noticed my son's room door was open, and something on his table caught my eye. It was purple. I went over to inspect it, and my heart sank. It was dried lavender. He had left it out in plain sight for me to see, almost as if he was taunting me, taking pride and even joy in what he did. He was mocking what he had just done to me. It was at this exact moment the last remnants of my marriage died. I know I probably should have said something, but when my husband and stepson came home later that day, I didn't say a word. In fact, I wasn't even going to do anything about it until my stepson mockingly asked why I was wearing long sleeve shirts and had hives on my neck. I don't know why, but that snarky comment triggered something inside me. I became determined to go out with a bang. You see, Jared is heavily lactose intolerant, and if he wants to play the allergy game, I was more than willing. That same day, I started sneaking dairy into his meals, and I've been doing so ever since. His school lunches, which are usually dairy-free, somehow end up containing cheese. His dinners are now magically cooked in butter, and milk always mysteriously finds its way into his breakfast. And because of this, Jared is going crazy. He's constantly in the bathroom, constantly feeling nauseous, and has even become scared of all food as he's convinced his body is giving up on him. Neither of them suspect me, and just last week I heard them arguing about how much toilet paper Jared is using. Unfortunately for me, they went to the doctors after a few days, and that's when everything started going downhill. David and Jared left for the doctor around 2 p.m. I paced the house, cleaning nervously and checking my phone every few minutes. They were gone for hours. I started to panic, imagining them talking to the doctor about food tampering. I mentally rehearsed explanations and excuses. The longer they were gone, the more scenarios I imagined, from them coming home with police officers to David demanding a divorce on the spot. When I heard the garage door open around 6 p.m., I quickly sat down with a book, trying to look casual. They walked in with serious expressions. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. David looked at me suspiciously while Jared glared. They knew something, but instead of confronting me, they went into the kitchen and started whispering. The tension in the house was palpable, like electricity before a storm. I pretended to read my book while straining to hear their conversation. I caught fragments like "could be" and "check the food," and watching her, my stomach dropped. They suspected me but didn't have proof yet. They were planning to catch me in the act. I realized I needed to be more careful, or perhaps stop altogether before this escalated even further. I'm sitting here now, writing this while they're both asleep. The doctor gave Jared some medication and told him to keep a food diary. They're planning to run more tests next week if things don't improve. I know I should stop. This whole revenge plan was stupid and childish, but part of me wants to keep going just to make Jared understand how it feels to be uncomfortable in your own home. Tomorrow morning, I need to decide, do I stop and hope they never figure it out, or do I continue and risk getting caught? Either way, I'm still researching divorce lawyers. This marriage was a mistake from the beginning. I just never realized how bad it would get. Update, it's 6 a.m. now. I just watched David sneaking around the kitchen, checking the refrigerator and cabinets. He was examining all the lactose-free products, probably looking for signs of tampering. He almost caught me watching from the hallway. I ducked into the bathroom quickly. I need to be more careful about where I store my dairy weapons if I decide to continue. I feel torn. On one hand, what I'm doing is wrong. On the other hand, they've both been awful to me, and no one else is on my side. David's family thinks he's perfect, and my own family lives across the country. I have no support system here. Maybe making Jared temporarily uncomfortable is the only way to get through to him before I leave for good. The divorce lawyer I contacted on April 7th has an opening in 2 weeks. I'm going to take it. In the meantime, I need to decide what to do about the dairy situation. Maybe I'll stop for a few days to make them think it was something else, then start again when they let their guard down. Or maybe I'll just focus on getting out of this toxic household as soon as possible. I never thought I'd be this person. I used to consider myself kind and forgiving. Now I'm sneaking dairy into a teenager's food for revenge. That's not who I want to be. But living with constant disrespect changes you. I'm not excusing my behavior. I know it's wrong. I'm just trying to survive until I can escape this nightmare marriage. I've just checked the kitchen again to make sure David isn't still lurking around. background. Coast is clear. It's scary how quickly I've turned into someone who sneaks around my own house. I never imagined being in this position when I said I do 2 years ago. But here we are, me hiding in the bathroom at 6 a.m., heart racing because my husband almost caught me spying on him while he was spying on me. What a mess. I decided to skip adding dairy to Jared's breakfast this morning. Better to lay low for a few days while they're suspicious. I made his usual avocado toast with his lactose-free cheese, being extra careful to use all the right products. Jared watched me like a hawk the entire time, hovering in the kitchen doorway. I could feel his eyes boring into my back as I prepared everything. Feeling any better today? I asked, trying to sound genuinely concerned. He just grunted and grabbed his plate, inspecting it carefully before taking a tiny test bite. When no immediate stomach pain followed, he seemed to relax slightly and took another bite. The distrust was obvious though. He wasn't going to let his guard down anytime soon. David came in a few minutes later, kissing Jared on the head before completely ignoring me. They whispered something to each other that I couldn't hear. This silent treatment was new. Usually David at least pretended everything was fine between us, even after our worst arguments. This cold shoulder approach felt different, more calculated. After they left, Jared to school and David to work, I searched the house to see if they'd set up any traps to catch me. I checked for hidden cameras or new security features on the refrigerator. Nothing obvious, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were planning something. I even checked my phone for spy apps, paranoid that they might be monitoring my internet searches about divorce lawyers. That afternoon, I received a text from David saying he and Jared would be late because of a follow-up appointment with the gastroenterologist. This was news to me. They hadn't mentioned a second appointment so soon. My anxiety spiked again. What if the doctor had somehow identified dairy as the culprit already? I spent the entire afternoon stress cleaning and rehearsing my defense. When they finally came home around 7 p.m., Jared went straight to his room without a word. David lingered in the kitchen where I was preparing dinner. He leaned against the counter, watching me chop vegetables with an unsettling intensity. The doctor thinks Jared might have developed some new food sensitivities, he said casually. Recommended we keep a detailed food log and maybe install a camera in the kitchen to see if we can identify what's triggering these episodes. My knife slipped, nearly cutting my finger. A camera? Isn't that a bit extreme? David shrugged. If it helps Jared feel better, nothing's too extreme. Don't you agree? The threat was thinly veiled. He was letting me know they were closing in. I nodded weakly and continued chopping, my hands slightly shaking. A camera would definitely catch me if I continued my dairy revenge. The game was changing. That night, I lay awake listening to David snore beside me. Our marriage had deteriorated so quickly. I remembered our honeymoon in Maui last summer, how he'd been so attentive and loving. When had things changed? Was it gradual, or had he been wearing a mask the entire time? I knew I needed to accelerate my escape plan. This house was becoming a psychological battleground, and I was outnumbered. The next morning, I checked our joint bank account and was shocked to discover David had withdrawn a significant amount yesterday. Nearly $5,000 was gone. When I casually mentioned it over breakfast, he dismissed my concern. Just needed some cash for Jared's medical stuff. Why, are you keeping tabs on me now? I backed down immediately, but internally, alarm bells were ringing. Was he already moving money around in anticipation of a divorce? I made a mental note to mention this to the lawyer when I saw her. I needed to protect what little financial independence I had left. The 3-story colonial we lived in was starting to feel like a prison. Each creaking floorboard and slammed door set my nerves on edge. The spacious kitchen with its granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, once my favorite room, now felt like contested territory where I was constantly being monitored. Even the master bedroom with its bay windows and attached bathroom no longer felt like a sanctuary. Not when I had to lock my toiletries in a case for fear of tampering. The next few days followed a similar pattern. Jared's stomach issues mysteriously improved since I'd stopped adding dairy to his food. The suspicious looks continued though. I frequently caught them whispering, only to stop abruptly when I entered the room. The tension was suffocating. On Thursday, April 12th, I came home from grocery shopping to find Jared rummaging through my personal toiletry items in our bathroom. He jumped when he saw me, quickly putting down my moisturizer. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "Looking for aspirin," he mumbled, pushing past me into the hallway. I checked my products immediately, smelling each one for any added lavender or other potential allergens. Everything seemed normal, but his behavior sent a clear message. He was planning retaliation. That night, I moved all my essential toiletries to a locked case and brought it to work the next day, storing it in my desk drawer. Better safe than sorry. The weekend arrived with an unexpected development. David announced Saturday morning that his parents were coming for dinner. I hadn't seen Robert and Linda since Christmas, and they'd always been coldly polite at best. David hadn't mentioned they were visiting, which wasn't surprising given our current communication status. I spent the day cleaning and preparing dinner, anxiety building with each passing hour. When the doorbell rang at 6 p.m., I plastered on my best fake smile and opened the door. Robert and Linda stood there with fixed smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Behind them was an unfamiliar woman around 50 years old. "This is Dr. Karen Mills," Linda announced as they entered. "She's a family friend and an excellent psychiatrist. We thought she could join us for dinner." My stomach dropped. This wasn't a casual family dinner. This was an intervention. They'd brought a psychiatrist to evaluate me without warning. I looked at David, who avoided my eyes, and Jared, who was smirking from the staircase. They'd planned this ambush together. Our formal dining room with its chandelier and dark wood table, normally used only for special occasions, became the setting for this unexpected psychological evaluation. Family photos hung on the burgundy walls, happy moments from before I entered the picture, reinforcing my status as an outsider in what should be my home. Dinner was excruciating. Dr. Mills asked seemingly casual questions about my childhood, my relationship with my parents, any history of emotional issues. Everyone watched me like I was a bomb about to explode. I answered politely but briefly, trying to maintain my composure while internally screaming. The breaking point came when Linda gently suggested that sometimes new wives can feel threatened by their stepchildren and develop concerning behaviors in response. She looked meaningfully at Dr. Mills, who nodded sagely. They were building a case that I was mentally unstable. I excused myself to the kitchen, supposedly to check on dessert, but actually to have a moment alone to breathe. My hands were shaking as I gripped the counter. David followed me in, closing the door behind him. "What the hell is this?" I whispered furiously. "We're concerned about you," he said, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. "You haven't been yourself lately. Mom thought Dr. Mills might be able to give us some insight." "Into what? The fact that your son put allergens in my products and you did nothing? Or that both of you treat me like a servant?" He sighed dramatically. "See, this is exactly what we're talking about. These delusions and accusations. Jared would never deliberately hurt you. Maybe you need help processing your feelings in a healthier way." I realized then that this was their strategy. Make me look unstable so anything I said about their behavior would be dismissed as paranoia. If I filed for divorce and mentioned the abuse, they'd claim I was mentally ill. It was insidious and terrifying. I somehow made it through dessert, excusing myself immediately after with a migraine. I locked myself in the guest bathroom, sat on the floor, and silently silently cried. I needed evidence of what was happening. I needed allies. I needed to get out before they completely destroyed my credibility and possibly my sanity. Sunday morning, I drove to the nearest electronics store and purchased a small camera, using cash so it wouldn't appear on our joint credit card. I installed it in our bedroom, hidden among my books on the shelf. If Jared was entering our room to tamper with my things, I would have proof. Over the next few days, I checked the footage whenever I had privacy. The third day, I hit pay dirt. The camera captured Jared entering our bedroom while we were both at work. He went directly to my nightstand, opening drawers and examining my personal items. Then he moved to the bathroom, where he spent several minutes doing something with my prescription medication. I couldn't see exactly what he was doing, but he was clearly tampering with something. I immediately counted my pills and discovered that my anxiety medication was short by several tablets. This wasn't just petty revenge anymore. This was dangerous. Messing with prescription medication could have serious consequences. I secured the remaining pills in a small lockbox that I kept with me at all times. That same evening, I noticed something odd about my dinner. The sauce on my pasta had a slightly different texture than David's and Jared's portions. I pretended to eat while actually moving the food around my plate, then excused myself and dumped it in the bathroom trash, hiding the evidence under tissues. I couldn't prove they'd tampered with it, but I wasn't taking chances anymore. The next morning, I woke up to find multiple missed calls from friends and family. Confused, I checked social media and found my stomach dropping in horror. Someone had created a fake profile using my name and photos, and had spent the night posting increasingly erratic and concerning messages. The posts ranged from bizarre conspiracy theories to vague threats and troubling statements about my mental health. Several friends had messaged me directly, asking if I was okay. My mother had left 3 voicemails, her voice tense with worry. I immediately reported the fake account and sent messages explaining I'd been hacked, but the damage was already done. People had seen those posts and associated them with me. When I confronted David about it, showing him the fake profile, he looked concerned but suggested that maybe I had created it myself during a dissociative episode and didn't remember. The casual way he proposed this, as if it were a reasonable explanation, made me realize how far they were willing to go to discredit me. I didn't create this, I said firmly, and I think you know exactly who did. He sighed heavily. See, this is exactly what my parents were concerned about. These paranoid accusations aren't healthy. Maybe we should call Dr. Mills and set up a proper appointment. I walked away rather than continue the conversation. It was clear reasoning with him was pointless. Instead, I drove to work and called the divorce lawyer from my office, moving my appointment up to the next day. I couldn't wait any longer. That night, Jared invited a friend over for dinner, something he'd never done before. The friend Thomas kept giving me strange looks throughout the meal. I caught him whispering to Jared several times, both of them glancing my way. After dinner, I overheard Thomas asking Jared, "Is she really as crazy as you said?" before they noticed me and quickly changed the subject. The realization that Jared was spreading rumors about me to his friends hit hard. This character assassination campaign was expanding beyond our household. I retreated to the bedroom early, documenting everything in a journal I kept hidden at work. The evidence was mounting, but I felt increasingly trapped and isolated. The meeting with the divorce lawyer the next day was both validating and terrifying. Jordan, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, listened to my story without judgment, asking clarifying questions and taking detailed notes. When I finished, she leaned forward with a serious expression. "What you're describing sounds like a coordinated campaign of emotional abuse and gaslighting," she said. "Unfortunately, it's not uncommon in high-conflict divorces. The good news is we can take steps to protect you. The bad news is that they've already laid groundwork to paint you as unstable, which complicates things." She advised me to document everything, secure my finances as much as possible, and consider moving out sooner rather than later. She also suggested I see a therapist, not because I needed psychological help, but to establish a professional record of my mental stability, in case they tried to use that against me in court. As I left her office, I felt simultaneously lighter and heavier. I had a plan now, but the road ahead looked difficult and possibly dangerous. I needed to be extremely careful about my next steps. When I returned home that evening, I noticed my journal wasn't exactly where I'd left it in my desk drawer. I always placed it with the spine facing right, but now it was facing left. Someone had been looking through my things again. I was glad I'd started keeping my real journal at work and only had a decoy journal at home, filled with innocuous entries about daily activities and deliberately mild complaints about married life. The next day brought a new development. I received an email from Jared's school principal requesting a meeting with both parents regarding an ongoing situation. David hadn't mentioned anything about school problems, which wasn't surprising given our current communication level. I forwarded the email to him with a simple, "Did you know about this?" His reply came quickly, "Already handling it. Don't involve yourself." I ignored his directive and responded to the principal that I would attend. I suspected this might be related to Jared's bullying, and I wanted to hear directly what was happening. If David and Jared were trying to discredit me, I needed allies who could see their behavior firsthand. The meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon. I arranged to leave work early, not telling David I planned to attend. When I arrived at the school office, I found David already there, looking surprised and annoyed to see me. The principal, Mr. Thompson, welcomed us both into his office where the guidance counselor, Ms. Rodriguez, was already waiting. "Thank you both for coming," Mr. Thompson began. "We're concerned about some ongoing behavioral issues with Jared. Despite his previous suspension, there have been additional reports of bullying, specifically targeting several students from lower-income backgrounds." David immediately went on the defensive, claiming Jared was being singled out unfairly. I remained silent, observing his automatic response of denial and deflection. Ms. Rodriguez pushed back gently, but firmly. "We have multiple witness statements, Mr. Sanders, and frankly, this pattern of behavior is escalating. The latest incident involved Jared posting altered photos of another student and making degrading comments about their family's financial situation." As they detailed more incidents, I noticed David becoming increasingly agitated. When Mr. Thompson mentioned the possibility of expulsion if the behavior continued, David started raising his voice, claiming the school was overreacting to normal teenage stuff. I finally spoke up. "I apologize for my husband's response. We take this very seriously and will ensure Jared understands the consequences of his actions." David shot me a venomous look, but I continued. "Could you provide us with specific recommendations for addressing this behavior at home?" The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, with the principal and counselor outlining expectations and consequences. Throughout it all, David alternated between defensive posturing and seething silence. When we left the office, he waited until we reached the parking lot before exploding. "How dare you undermine me like that? This is my son, not yours. You have no right to speak for our family. Bullying isn't normal teenage stuff, David. It's harmful and indicates deeper issues that need addressing." He got in my face, pointing his finger inches from my nose. "You don't know the first thing about raising boys. Stay in your lane and out of my parenting. Your parenting is creating a person who thinks it's okay to hurt others," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Just like you've taught him it's okay to hurt me." His face contorted with rage, and for a moment, I thought he might actually hit me. Instead, he spat on the ground near my feet and stormed off to his car. I stood shaking in the parking lot, realizing this confrontation had just accelerated everything. There was no going back now. That night, David didn't come home. He texted only to say he was staying with a friend to cool off. Jared was at his grandparents' house, so I had the place to myself for the first time in months. The silence was both relieving and eerie. I used the opportunity to secure more of my personal belongings and important documents. I packed a go bag with essentials in case I needed to leave quickly and hid it in my car trunk. I also withdrew some cash from my personal account and contacted a few friends to see if I could stay with them if necessary. Around midnight, I received a text from an unknown number. "We know what you did to Jared's food. Evidence has been collected. Prepare for consequences." My blood ran cold. I couldn't be certain who sent it, David, Jared, or even Linda, but the threat was clear. They were escalating their intimidation tactics. I screenshotted the message for my records and tried to sleep with a chair propped against my bedroom door. The next morning, I called in sick to work and went straight to my lawyer's office with the threatening text. Jordan advised me to file for a temporary restraining order based on the escalating hostility and documented threats. She seemed particularly concerned about the mention of consequences. "This isn't just about divorce anymore," she explained. "We need to ensure your physical safety while we proceed." I spent most of the day completing paperwork and providing statements. By late afternoon, I had a temporary order prohibiting David from threatening or contacting me except through our lawyers. It wasn't comprehensive protection, but it was a start. When I returned home to collect more of my things, I found David waiting in the living room. My heart nearly stopped. He held up his phone, showing the restraining order notification. "Really? This is how you want to play it?" His voice was eerily calm, which frightened me more than his shouting. "You sent me a threatening text," I replied, staying near the door. "And you've been helping Jared torment me for months. I'm protecting myself." He laughed coldly. "Prove it was me who sent that text. Prove any of your crazy accusations. All you're doing is showing everyone how unstable you really are." "I'm leaving now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The restraining order says you need to stay away from me. This is my house. You're the one who needs to leave." He stood up, blocking the path to the bedroom. "But go ahead. Call the cops. Let's see who they believe. Me or the woman who's been tampering with a minor's food and having paranoid delusions." I realized with horror that he was right. I had no proof of their behavior, but they had manufactured evidence against me. If I called the police now, it could backfire terribly. I backed slowly toward the door. "I'll have my lawyer contact yours about retrieving my belongings," I said, then turned and fled to my car, hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I drove straight to my friend Taylor's apartment, where she'd agreed I could stay temporarily. As I explained the situation, her expression grew increasingly concerned. She'd met David and Jared several times and had always commented on how charming they both were. Now she was seeing the other side of them for the first time. "They seemed so normal," she said, helping me bring in my small bag of belongings. "David was always bragging about what a great father he was." "They're both excellent at maintaining their public image," I replied. "That's what makes this so difficult. No one sees what happens behind closed doors." That night, I received multiple texts from mutual friends asking if I was doing okay and mentioning they were concerned about my mental health. One even referred to my erratic behavior at the school meeting. It was clear David was spreading his narrative widely and effectively. My social support network was being systematically poisoned against me. The next day, I discovered my work email had been flooded with messages from a wellness center specializing in mental health crises, confirming my appointment that someone had scheduled on my behalf. My boss called me into her office, looking uncomfortable. "We received a concerning call from your husband," she began carefully. "He mentioned you've been experiencing some difficulties lately and might need time off for treatment." I took a deep breath and decided complete honesty was my only option. I explained the situation, the abusive household, the gaslighting campaign, the divorce proceedings, and David's efforts to discredit me professionally. To my immense relief, she listened without judgment and assured me my job was secure. She even offered to have IT change my work passwords and restrict information about me to prevent further interference. That small victory gave me hope, but I knew the battle was just beginning. David and Jared had spent months systematically isolating me and damaging my credibility. Reclaiming my life and reputation would be an uphill struggle. Later that week, I received another email from Jared's school. There had been yet another bullying incident, this time serious enough that the parents of the victim were considering legal action. The principal requested another meeting, this time with all parties involved. My lawyer advised against attending since I was no longer living in the home, but something told me this meeting was important. If David's parenting was being questioned by multiple sources, it could help my case. I decided to go, preparing myself for another confrontation. The meeting was scheduled for Monday afternoon. I arrived early and waited in the parking lot, watching for David's car. When he pulled up, I noticed Jared wasn't with him. Unusual, since this meeting was specifically about his behavior. Inside the principal's office, the atmosphere was tense. Mr. Thompson sat behind his desk looking grave. Ms. Rodriguez was there again, along with another couple I assumed were the parents of Jared's victim. David nodded curtly at me but didn't speak. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Thompson began. "We've asked you here today because the situation has escalated beyond what our regular disciplinary procedures can address." The father of the bullied student, who introduced himself as Richard, spoke up. "My son has been tormented by Jared for months. It started with verbal taunts about our financial situation after I lost my job, then escalated to physical intimidation and social media harassment. Last week, Jared distributed altered photos suggesting my son is homeless and eats from garbage cans." I watched David's face, expecting his usual dismissive defense. Instead, he looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Something had changed. Ms. Rodriguez slid a folder across the desk. "These are screenshots of the social media posts. We've also included statements from 8 other students who have experienced similar treatment from Jared." 8 others. The number hit me hard. This wasn't isolated bullying. It was a systematic campaign targeting vulnerable students. It mirrored exactly how Jared treated me at home, with David's tacit approval. "What's particularly concerning," Mr. Thompson continued, "is that when confronted, Jared showed no remorse. In fact, he suggested his behavior was justified because these students are, in his words, losers who need to learn their place." Richard's wife, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Our son has developed anxiety so severe he can't sleep. He's afraid to come to school. No child should live in fear like this." David finally spoke, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "I understand your concerns. I've spoken with Jared about this behavior before." "Have you?" I interrupted, unable to contain myself. "Because at home, you've consistently reinforced that this type of behavior is acceptable. You've called it normal and said other kids need to harden up." The room fell silent. David glared at me while the others looked between us, sensing the deeper conflict. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. "In light of this pattern of behavior and Jared's unwillingness to acknowledge its impact, the school board has decided on expulsion. This decision is final." David's face flushed with anger. "You can't do that. He's in his senior year." "We can and have," Mr. Thompson replied firmly, the safety of our student body is our priority. Jared will need to complete his education elsewhere. As the meeting continued, arrangements were discussed for Jared's academic transition. Throughout it all, I observed David's growing agitation. The carefully constructed image of his perfect family life was crumbling, and he clearly blamed me for it. When the meeting ended, David cornered me in the hallway, keeping his voice low but intense. "You've ruined everything. Are you happy now? First you try to poison my son, then you get him expelled. This ends now." Before I could respond, Richard approached us, having overheard David's comment. "Excuse me, but your son ruined my child's sense of safety and self-worth. If anyone's responsible for his expulsion, it's Jared himself." He turned to me. "Thank you for speaking up in there. It's clear this behavior has been enabled for too long." David stormed off, leaving me with Richard and his wife. They asked about my situation, sensing the obvious tension. I shared a simplified version of recent events, and they exchanged knowing glances. "We've been documenting everything for a potential lawsuit," Richard explained. "If you need support for your divorce proceedings, we'd be willing to provide statements about what we've observed of their behavior." I nearly cried at this unexpected allyship. After feeling isolated and disbelieved for so long, having someone validate my experience was overwhelming. We exchanged contact information before parting ways. As I drove back to Taylor's apartment, I reflected on how dramatically things had shifted in just a few weeks. From secretly adding dairy to Jared's food in a petty revenge scheme, I now found myself in the midst of legal proceedings with unexpected allies emerging. The situation had escalated beyond anything I could have anticipated. That night, I received a voicemail from Linda, David's mother. Her voice sounded different, less confident, more hesitant. We need to talk. Some things have come to light that, well, Robert and I are concerned. Please call me back when you can." I played the message for Taylor, unsure whether to trust this apparent olive branch. It could easily be another trap. "Call her back, but be careful what you say," Taylor advised. "Record the conversation if you can." I followed her suggestion, enabling call recording before returning Linda's call. She answered on the first ring. "Thank you for calling back," she began, her usually crisp voice sounding tired. "Robert and I have been doing some thinking since the expulsion. We've also spoken with Richard and Ann Clark, the parents from the meeting. They shared some concerns that match things you've mentioned before." I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "We found something in Jared's room at our house," she said hesitantly. "I was cleaning and discovered a journal where he's written some disturbing things about the bullying, about you, about plans for what he calls revenge. Robert thinks we should show it to you." My guard immediately went up. This sudden change of heart seemed suspicious after months of them treating me like I was the problem. "Why the change of perspective?" I asked cautiously. Linda sighed. "The Clarks described behavior we've actually witnessed ourselves but dismissed. And the journal entries, they're genuinely concerning. I'm starting to think we may have been supporting the wrong narrative." We arranged to meet the following day at a public cafe. I informed my lawyer about the meeting, and she advised having someone accompany me as a witness. Taylor immediately volunteered. That night, I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with possibilities. Was this a genuine realization on their part, or an elaborate setup? What could Jared have written that would change his grandparents' perspective so dramatically? And how would David react when he discovered his parents might be switching sides? I met Linda and Robert at the cafe the next morning with Taylor at my side. They looked exhausted, like they hadn't slept in days. Linda had a manila folder clutched tightly in her hands. When we sat down, she slid it across the table without saying anything. I opened it and felt my stomach drop. Inside were pages torn from what appeared to be Jared's journal, along with photographs of his room at their house. The journal entries were disturbing. Detailed plans for making the bitch pay, including putting more than just lavender in my products. He'd written about researching cleaning chemicals that wouldn't be easily detected but would cause skin reactions or worse. "We found these hidden under his mattress when we were changing the sheets," Robert explained, his voice unsteady. "At first, we thought it was just angry venting, but then we saw this." He pointed to a page with a detailed timeline and specific plans. There were lists of my allergies, my schedule, and disturbing drawings of me covered in rashes. The most alarming page had yesterday's date marked with special surprise in her coffee. "Did he actually do any of this?" Taylor asked, looking horrified. Linda nodded slowly. "We found empty containers of various products in his trash. We also found these." She pulled out her phone and showed us photos of my toiletries, my actual bottles and containers, hidden in a box in Jared's closet at their house. He'd been stealing my products, tampering with them, and returning them to our bathroom. "Why are you showing me this now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Robert looked down, shame evident on his face. "We always thought David was the reasonable one. When he told us you were unstable and making things up about Jared, we believed him because he's our son. But after the school meeting and talking to those other parents, we started noticing things," Linda continued. "The way Jared talks about people, the way David dismisses serious concerns, then finding these," she gestured to the journal pages. "We couldn't ignore it anymore. I felt a complex mix of validation and horror. Finally, someone believed me, but the evidence was far more disturbing than even I had imagined. This wasn't just bullying or petty revenge. These were potentially dangerous plans." "Have you shown these to David?" I asked. They exchanged uncomfortable glances. "We tried," Robert admitted. "He said Jared is just processing his anger in a healthy way, and that we're overreacting. He accused us of taking your side against family." That sounded exactly like David. In his world, any criticism was a betrayal, and loyalty meant enabling bad behavior. "We're worried," Linda said quietly. "Not just for you, but for Jared too. This level of anger and calculation isn't normal. He needs help, not encouragement." I thanked them for coming forward and asked to keep the copies of the journal pages. They agreed and also offered to speak to my lawyer if needed. As we parted ways, Linda hugged me awkwardly, our first genuine interaction since I'd met her. Taylor and I drove straight to my lawyer's office with the new evidence. Jordan examined everything carefully, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "This changes everything," she said finally. "These aren't just the angry scribblings of a teenager. There's clear intent to cause harm here." She looked up at me. "We need to file for an emergency protection order against both Jared and David immediately." I spent the next 3 hours giving statements and filing paperwork. By late afternoon, a judge had granted temporary protection orders requiring both David and Jared to stay at least 500 feet away from me, my workplace, and my temporary residence. My phone started blowing up with texts from David almost immediately after the orders were served. I didn't read them, just forwarded them to Jordan as evidence of him violating the order already. She advised me to stay with friends he didn't know about for a few days, just to be safe. I crashed at my coworker James's apartment that night. I barely knew him, but he'd overheard me on the phone with my lawyer and offered his spare room as a place David would never think to look. I accepted gratefully, feeling like I was in some bizarre spy movie, hiding from my own husband. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of missed calls and more texts from David. I continued ignoring them, sending screenshots to Jordan instead. I also had 3 missed calls from Robert. When I called him back, he sounded panicked. "David came to our house last night after getting the protection order," he explained. explained. He was furious, blaming us for betraying him. He took Jared and all his things and said we'd never see either of them again if we continued helping you. My heart sank. Did you call the police? Yes, but they said since David has legal custody of Jared, there's nothing they can do about them leaving. They did document the threatening behavior though. I thanked him and hung up, immediately calling Jordan to update her. She was concerned about David potentially trying to flee with Jared to avoid consequences. She suggested I return to my apartment with a police escort to gather more of my belongings, in case this turned into a longer separation than anticipated. 2 officers accompanied me that afternoon. The apartment was empty, thankfully, but I discovered many of my possessions had been damaged. My clothes were cut up, photos were shredded, and someone had poured what smelled like bleach over my home office area, destroying my personal laptop and documents. The officers documented everything while I packed whatever remained intact. As I was leaving, our neighbor Mrs. Johnson approached cautiously. I've been meaning to talk to you, she said quietly. I've heard a lot of concerning things through the walls, and last night there was a huge commotion. That man and his son were throwing things and yelling about making you disappear if you continued with the legal case. I asked if she'd be willing to make a statement, and she agreed immediately. She'd apparently been documenting disturbances for months, including dates and times. Another unexpected ally emerged from a situation I thought I was facing alone. Over the next week, more evidence accumulated. 3 of Jared's former friends, including Thomas, came forward with text messages where Jared had explicitly discussed plans to teach me a lesson for disrespecting him and his dad. The texts included references to putting chemicals in my food and toiletries that would make me really sick, but looked like she's just crazy. Jordan filed for an emergency hearing based on the mounting evidence and witness statements. The judge scheduled it for the following Monday. David was required to appear with Jared, and the court would determine whether the temporary protection order should be made permanent. The weekend before the hearing was agonizing. I stayed at a hotel under a different name, jumping at every noise and checking the locks repeatedly. Jordan had advised me to be especially cautious since David hadn't been seen at work or their apartment for several days. Monday morning arrived with a strange sense of both dread and relief. This would finally come to a head, one way or another. I arrived at the courthouse with Jordan and Taylor, both providing moral support. Robert and Linda were already there, looking nervous but determined. When David and Jared finally appeared with their lawyer, I felt physically ill. David looked surprisingly put together and calm, while Jared had clearly been coached to appear innocent and victimized. They both wore suits and subdued expressions, the picture of respectability. The hearing began with Jordan presenting our evidence, the journal entries, witness statements, the documented pattern of abuse and retaliation. David's lawyer tried to paint me as a vindictive, unstable woman who had been abusing Jared by tampering with his food. He even had medical records showing Jared's lactose intolerance episodes. I hadn't expected them to actually prove the dairy incidents, and my stomach dropped. Jordan had warned me this might come up and had prepared accordingly. When it was her turn to respond, she didn't deny the dairy incidents but put them in context. Yes, my client admits to a brief, ill-advised period where she added regular dairy to Jared's food, Jordan stated calmly. This occurred after months of documented abuse, including Jared deliberately exposing her to a severe allergen that required medical treatment. It was a regrettable reaction to ongoing torment. The key difference is that my client's actions, while inappropriate, caused temporary discomfort with no lasting harm, while the respondent's actions show escalating patterns potentially leading to serious injury. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, asked several pointed questions of both sides. When David took the stand, he was the picture of concerned fatherhood, expressing worry about my declining mental state and how I'd targeted his innocent son out of jealousy. I thought I might throw up watching his performance. His ability to lie convincingly was truly stunning. For a moment, I even questioned my own reality. Had I somehow misinterpreted everything? But then Jordan showed the text messages between David and Jared, discussing plans to make me pay and teach me my place. David's facade cracked slightly as he tried to explain these away as just venting. When it was Jared's turn to testify, something unexpected happened. The carefully coached performance began to unravel under the judge's direct questioning. When asked specifically about the journal entries and plans to put chemicals in my products, Jared became defensive and contradictory. She deserved it for what she did to me, he finally blurted out, losing his composure. She was trying to take my dad away and make me sick with the dairy stuff. Dad said we had to show her who's really in charge. The courtroom fell silent. David's lawyer tried to call for a recess, but the judge refused. She continued questioning Jared, who became increasingly agitated and eventually admitted to multiple instances of tampering with my belongings, all with David's knowledge and encouragement. By the end of the hearing, the judge granted permanent protection orders against both David and Jared. She also ordered a full psychiatric evaluation for Jared and referred the case to the district attorney for potential criminal charges against David for contribution to the delinquency of a minor and failure to protect. As we left the courtroom, I felt numb rather than victorious. The system had worked technically, but the cost had been enormous. My marriage was over, my possessions damaged or destroyed, my sense of safety shattered, and my trust in people severely damaged. What happens now? I asked Jordan as we walked to her car. Now we proceed with the divorce with this judgment as supporting evidence, she explained. David will likely face additional legal consequences depending on what the DA decides. As for Jared, the psychiatric evaluation will determine next steps for him. In the months that followed, things moved both quickly and agonizingly slowly. The divorce proceedings advanced, with the evidence from the protection order hearing making it difficult for David to contest anything. The financial discovery revealed he'd been hiding assets throughout our marriage, leading to a much more favorable settlement than I might have otherwise received. Jared's psychiatric evaluation revealed concerning personality patterns that the psychologist linked directly to his father's influence and parenting style. He was ordered into intensive therapy, with his grandparents granted temporary guardianship, while David dealt with his own legal issues. David eventually pled guilty to reduced charges to avoid jail time, accepting probation and mandatory counseling instead. His professional reputation suffered significantly once the case details became public. The last I heard, he'd moved to another state to start over. 6 months after that final hearing, I was settling into a new apartment in a different city, with a new job, and slowly rebuilding my life. The divorce was finalized, the protection orders remained in place, and I was gradually learning to trust my own perceptions again after months of gaslighting. Surprisingly, Linda and Robert maintained contact, sending occasional updates about Jared's progress in therapy. According to them, he was slowly recognizing how his father's influence had shaped his behavior, and was working to develop healthier patterns. I appreciated their updates but maintained firm boundaries, unwilling to become directly involved in Jared's rehabilitation. One afternoon, I received a letter forwarded through my lawyer. It was from Jared, part of his therapy process to make amends to those he'd harmed. The letter was awkward and still showed signs of minimizing and justification, but it also contained genuine acknowledgement of specific harmful actions and their impact. I read it once, then filed it away without responding. Maybe someday I'd feel ready to acknowledge his efforts at growth, but for now, I needed to focus on my own healing. The therapist I'd been seeing helped me understand that forgiveness wasn't necessary for my recovery, and that maintaining distance was a valid choice. The dairy revenge now seemed like something from another lifetime, a desperate act by a person pushed to her breaking point. I wasn't proud of it, but I also recognized it as a symptom of a profoundly toxic situation, rather than a reflection of who I truly was. 3 months ago, I ran into Richard and Ann Clark at a fundraiser for anti-bullying programs. Their son was doing better at his new school, they told me, and they'd used part of their settlement from the lawsuit against David to establish a support group for families affected by bullying. You know, in a strange way, we're grateful the situation came to light when it did, Richard said. If it had continued unchecked, who knows how many more kids would have been hurt, or how much worse the bullying might have gotten. I understood what he meant. Despite the trauma of the past year, exposing the truth had ultimately been necessary, not just for me, but for everyone affected by David and Jared's behavior. Last week, I had dinner with Taylor and some new friends. When someone asked how my ex and I had split up, I gave the simplified version I now use for people who don't need the full story. Taylor squeezed my hand under the table in silent support, and the conversation moved on to other topics. As I drove home that night, I realized I hadn't checked over my shoulder once during the evening to see if I was being followed. I hadn't inspected my food before eating it. I hadn't flinched when someone moved suddenly near me. Small victories, but meaningful ones. The apartment I live in now has excellent security, but I no longer keep a chair propped against my bedroom door at night. The nightmares about finding chemicals in my food or waking up covered in hives have become less frequent. My therapist says healing isn't linear, and some days are still harder than others. I'm not the same person who excitedly planned to be the perfect stepmom over a year ago. That naive optimism is gone, replaced by a wariness I suspect will never completely disappear. But I'm also stronger, more discerning about who I trust, and absolutely unwavering in maintaining my boundaries. Sometimes I think about what might have happened if I just filed for divorce after the lavender incident instead of starting my dairy revenge. Would things have escalated the same way? Would David and Jared have shown their true colors so clearly? Would others have seen through their facade without the dramatic confrontations that followed? There's no way to know. All I can do is move forward, continue healing, and remember that even in my darkest moments, when it seemed like everyone believed their lies about me, I still knew my own truth. Sometimes that's enough to keep going until the light finally breaks through.
Real Reddit stories. If you love wild things and crazy drama, hit that subscribe button and drop a like to help more people find the madness.